Goliath, Riot Baby, Beasts Made of Night, and War Girls. He appeared on WNHH before with Paul Bass in March 2022 when Goliath was published, and subsequently on this program for my More Tochi, More Goliath episode. And now we're here again to talk about his latest book and his upcoming one, Race Book, A Personal History of the Internet. Welcome to Law, Life, and Culture, Tochi.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see you again, Betsy.
Oh, it's always wonderful to see you. Well, Tochi graduated from Choate, then received his BA majoring in political science at Yale University, his JD from Columbia Law School, a master's degree in global economic law at Sciences Po in Paris, and his MFA in dramatic writing from NYU. He also worked in the Civil Rights Bureau at the New York State Attorney General's office and for New York City's legal aid. I bring this up not to just merely rattle off Tochi's accomplishments, but because his writings always address larger social issues such as climate change, economic justice, and race. But Tochi, this book is different from others in that it's written in a detective mystery noir style. Why did you choose this genre this time?
There are a couple reasons, actually. One of which was I was a bit, I don't want to say burned out after Goliath, but it was a very intense and taxing writing experience. Absolutely enjoyable, very uh, transformative in a lot of ways, but the book is a bit dense, a bit elliptical, and I wanted to see if I had it within me to write something a little more straightforward. So, in some ways, Harmattan season was a bit of a challenge that I posed myself. Could I write a straightforward story you set within a compressed time frame, very plotty, but at the same time meaningful and uh, taking on a subject matter that was of interest to me. And so those are some of the the impetuses behind Harmattan season. And so I decided I would write a mystery.
Well, as a quick summary, the narrator, Bubakar or Buba, is a bit of a downtrodden private detective seeing bills mount, avoiding bill collectors, looking for work, but not exactly for what knocks on his door. That knock leads to a much larger political intrigue involving oppression, race, money, war crimes in an unidentified colonial West African city occupied by the French. One thing I loved about this book is its snappy dialogue that the narrator has with others and himself. Tochi, can I ask you to read one of your favorite passages?
So let me see if I can find one really quickly. Um, let's see. Well, I'll go from the beginning because I think the beginning tonally sort of gives an indication to readers of where I'm going with this. Fortune always left the room I walked into, which is why I don't leave my place much these days. Works pretty well. I keep my office close, downstairs actually, for others' sake. Means that the bad luck radius stays small. But of course the work suffers. The neighbors under my office too noisy with all their kids and uncles and grandparents, three whole generations of ruckus, and maybe four rooms tops. And never enough jobs to keep the tax collectors off my back. But hey, they show up, knock on my door, they'll stub their toe on the way in. Maybe bang their head against a loose piece of door frame or get into a fight with their wife later that night. Not my fault, right? I did my best. But if the interest on my late school fees is worth it, who am I to stop a man? Still, I got a nice east facing window, so when the sun comes up through in the mornings, it wakes me out of my shisha stupor. When I'm not already up because a sleepless night is the bequest of a guy like me. All of which is to say I like my life. Rather, I'm good with it. I don't need much. I certainly don't need trouble. But that's the thing about living in a town, living with other people. Need finds you. And I guess you can say it's need that's banging on my door in the middle of the night. The neighbors are loud enough that I don't hear it at first. Just another peal of thunder in the storm. But then the thuds get sharper. They get that particular wood threatening crack to them. People do not like that. Trouble does.
What do you like about that passage particularly, and what do you hope readers or our listeners gain from it?
Oh my goodness. I'm a prose junkie. I love, love, love sentences and playing with sentences. And my habit is, to go ornate, sort of riddle a sentence with subjunctive clauses. I think in Riot Baby, there's a sentence that goes on for a full page. I love that stuff, right? And this is part of the challenge I wanted to pose to myself. Could I do the opposite? Could I be a little bit more punchy? Could I be a little bit more clipped? And at the same time, maintain a sort of music to my paragraphs. And I really, really liked what resulted. And similarly, with the dialogue, where the characters are very sort of quick and snappy with each other. That was something I realized I had a lot of fun doing, and that may potentially carry on into future books.
In addition to enjoying the writing and the prose, what do you hope readers take away from the book? In other words, why did you write it?
Oh my goodness. I mean, again, I wanted to write a mystery novel, a crime novel, but the wonderful thing about crime novels, and this is something that I appreciate about the genre as a whole, especially with authors like Dennis Lehane, George Pelecanos, Richard Price. Like personally, I think Clockers is like a contender for the great American novel. The genre is a bit of a pinhole into wider social issues. So crime novels are sort of like social novels. You look back at the 19th century with Balzac and Zola and all sort of these French authors that were writing these books that were trying to shine a light on the entirety of French society. Crime novels do that for us. They take this single instance, whether it's a murder or some sort of accident or a crime that's been committed, and they use that as a way of exploring the entirety of the society in which the story is set. And so this was an opportunity for me to use a particular incident as a sort of pinhole through which I could travel and explore all these issues of colonialism and accountability and race and really sort of travel through the entirety of a society. And so it managed to be a pretty big book for its short page count.
I agree. And there were many fascinating elements to this book. The way it explores race, not only in an overall society, but also for the individual, including the narrator and readers. You do this as Booba and his best friend, the cop, Moussa, are deux fois in French, two times, half native Dugalin and half French. And Booba explains it is, quote, because God had to try us with us twice. And quote, the scourge of the Dufois being torn between communities, the fact that you understand abuse in each language. They're always saying something bad about some part of you. Where does Booba fit in today's conversation on race relations and justice?
Well, Booba is a fascinating character to me because he's an opportunity to explore the underside of privilege. Because, traditionally at least in the United States and the American sort of racial context, lighter skin, the ability to pass meant this opportunity to rise up the social ladder, to be able to walk into certain places that others of a darker hue would not be able to, and whatnot. But there can be a personal tax to that. There can be a sort of a toll that the soul has to pay. And I wanted to explore this, and also too in the present context, you see this incredible contradiction all the time, at least in American society, where, for instance, the idea of black cops, when there's this idea that police have oftentimes historically been a tool for the oppression of racial minorities, or, Latino people working for ICE in our present context. You're like, how does this happen? How does this work? The person who's situated in this interstitial space, what is going through their mind? And so all these questions of like accountability and your place in the social strata, those are all very knotty questions for me. And I don't know that they're questions that have answers, but they're questions that are absolutely fascinating to explore.
Years ago, I saw Salman Rushdie speak, and he said, quote, all fiction is autobiographical or else it's plagiarism. You went to Cho, Yale, Sciences Po, Paris, which I assume informs your work. With these experiences and your Nigerian American heritage, is there some straddling of worlds that gave you a unique perspective for this book?
It's funny, every book in some ways is an agglomeration of my fascinations. So, I was a poli-sci major in college, so I'm always going to be interested in these concepts like civil war, like colonialism, even things like sovereign debt and international political economy, these really sort of 30,000 feet in the air style concepts. At the same time, I'm also product of the work that I've done, particularly the work in public interest law, whether for the New York Attorney General's office or for legal aid. And so all of these concerns, all of these fascinations inform my work, and they're the fascinations that I sort of follow. And I think that's part of the autobiography that's in the work. Is this is the stuff that I'm interested in by virtue of my work history, where I've grown up, where I've come from, the schools that I went to, all of that. But also, there are more nakedly autobiographical details, particularly in the fact that our protagonist, Bubakar, is buried under a mountain of student loan debt.
Oh, goodness. Well, I thought it was also particularly effective how both Musa and Buba have a shared history working for Suradasi. I gathered that was an elite special forces organization like the CIA or the UK's MI6 or Israel's Shin Bet. So Musa has a view that's in essence, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but are you crazy? Unless we keep working for the French, they'll tear us apart. Do you think there are comparable conversations today where people with our racially complicated layers of society are here in the US?
Certainly. I mean, it goes back to the examples that I brought up earlier of people, particularly people from racial minorities, sort of taking positions in these oppressive mechanisms, particularly with regards to law enforcement. There can be any number of motivations. It could be personal motivations like, hey, the pay is good and I have a family to take care of. Or it could be, this is an opportunity to increase my social standing and to uh, play a part in the dominant, sort of class or what have you. Sometimes it can just, it can be a sort of, you know, I'm one of the good ones, and so I'm going after the bad ones. So like there are all sorts of interesting motivations going on there, and that I think is some of the stuff that informs the decisions that these characters had made in their past to be a part of the colonizing army.
Did you anticipate any of what's happening in the current landscape when you wrote this book, when you started it, and while you were writing it?
Oh my goodness, that's the plight of the speculative fiction writer. Is whether it's science fiction or fantasy. Oftentimes the question comes up as to how did you know this was going to happen? And the truth ultimately is that I didn't, but oftentimes what we do in our work is we just sort of follow existing trends or what's currently, because all these books, whether set in the future or set in the far past, they're all ultimately about our now. And it was similarly with Goliath. I wasn't trying to be prescient or anything. I was talking about what was already happening. And so a lot of what's in Harmattan season is based on what has happened, what is already happening, and the sort of ways in which colonial dynamics can sort of reinvent themselves in every new sort of political or historical era. There are parts of our society today that would bear resemblance to Francophone West Africa at the turn of the last millennium, or at the turn of the last century. And so that's really, I'm just following the strands that I can see, really.
How much on a personal level do you want readers to consider accountability for the state of affairs in the US and even on a more global stage?
Oh my goodness, that is a very good question because, there's the individual and there's the government, right? And so, as an American citizen, as just like a regular, degular taxpayer, I'm not a senator, I'm not a representative, I'm not the head of a government agency, I'm not a decision maker. But at the same time, you look at, say, for instance, atrocities that are committed by the US government, sort of in the name of their citizens, in the name of the people that pay them their tax dollars. And there is this, I believe, unavoidable issue of complicity and of accountability. And how do you reckon with that, right? You're like, I myself as an individual don't necessarily have the power to change things. I can call my senator, I can march, there are all these things that I can do to signal my discontent, to, speak with my voice. But at the same time, what am I in the face of this larger system, this larger power dynamic? And these are unanswerable questions. But one of the things that I found, and this is something that I think I've tried to, display in the book, is the power of local community. Within this system of colonial oppression, there are places in this city, whether it's the market, whether it's individual family homes, whether it's the home that's literally underneath Buba's office, where these beautiful life affirming things are happening and where the world is being made a better place, even if it's just within the confines of that space. So, like, even if it's just within the confines of your neighborhood, your community, your living room, that I think is a power that people can have. And I think that matters.
You're listening to WNHH 103.5 FM in New Haven, Connecticut. I'm Betsy Kim, and we're talking to author Tochi Onyebuchi on his latest book, Harmattan Season. And we're also going to get insights on his upcoming book, Race Book. So, another unique aspect of Harmattan Season is your clear cultural fluency with West Africa. And I recall from our last conversation, you're Nigerian American with your parents who immigrated to the US from Nigeria. And with this latest book's title, there really is a Harmattan season. Can you explain what it means?
So yeah, the Harmattan is a dust storm that sweeps through West Africa, and a lot of the dust, the sand, comes from the Sahara Desert, and it sort of blows south and through a lot of these countries, and it's a seasonal phenomenon. There's a whole season around it, similar to monsoon season and what have you, and I didn't learn about this until, my mother randomly at some point was talking about, the Harmattan blowing through Nigeria when she was younger. So I'd look deeper into it and I was like, oh, this is very fascinating. And so when the book was coming together and I was thinking more thematically about things and about the issues that I wanted to get into, particularly with regards to memory and the memory of national trauma and whatnot, and efforts by various forces to wipe out that memory. The Harmattan actually was like the perfect metaphor for that, and actually also gave me the title of the book.
But seasons also imply a time for change. And ultimately, is that what the book is about? Opportunity for change in individuals and in society?
Absolutely. I mean, at least by the time the reader gets to the end, I hope that is a message that they come away with.
In our last interview about your book Goliath, we chatted about what you mentioned earlier in this conversation, your sophistication in word choice and how you chose big words that weren't even in my old school copy Webster's dictionary. Words were like catachresis and apophthenia. And by the way, I now love those words. Catachresis is what Miss Malapro constantly uses in The Rivals, or George Bush's words like strategize. But with this book, you introduce readers to West African or possibly Nigerian vocabulary. So again, it's not exactly a simple book for this word choice. But names like Bubakar, Musa, Zanga, Kadiatau don't become Bobby or Katie. You bring in cultural customs with clothing like jalabas and the importance of sharing a pot of tea or smoking shisha pipes, and you don't call them hookahs. What kind of journey are you taking readers on, and what do you hope that they'll gain?
I mean, I'm such a big fan of immersion, sort of throwing the reader into the deep end of the pool. And if I was going to situate a story in a particular sort of geographic region, I wanted it to be as holistic and complete an experience as I could manage. So, the foreign words are drawn from Bambara, which is sort of a language spoken in Mali and throughout the Sahel region of Africa. There are allusions to Timbuktu and what have you. And so whether it's in TV shows, whether it's in books that I'm reading, I love just being thrown into a place and kind of sort of having to navigate for myself what things mean, or what based on the context, what a particular word means, or what this particular gesture that a character does implies and whatnot. It really feels there's a sense of authenticity to it, where even if it's a completely fabricated world, I feel like it's a world that I can touch, that I can taste and whatnot. And that, in my personal experience, has made the reading experience, the artistic experience, that much richer.
With today's anti immigration sentiments, news of ICE raids, xenophobia's not subsiding, do you feel your book serves to remind people of the beauty and opportunity of knowing and learning about other countries and cultures? Was that one of the reasons why you wrote the book?
I mean, one of the biggest reasons why I wrote this book and why I write in general is that I'm always prompted to put out into the world, or at least onto my laptop, things that I haven't seen before. And so I hadn't necessarily come across this setting utilized in this way in a book. I'd never really seen a murder mystery or a crime novel set in colonial West Africa. Um, Similarly with Goliath, all the stories of climate apocalypse that I'd read, none of them seem to center people of color. And none of them seem to address the question of what is the place, or what could potentially be the place of people of color in this future of climate apocalypse, where many people have left the planet. With Riot Baby, this animating question of what if God was a young black woman? I'd never seen that question addressed or even asked, really. And so that was something that I wanted to get into. That was a question that I wanted to follow. And so the motivations for me are are kind of selfish. It's really, what do I want to see, especially if it's, something like a book where I'll be spending quite a bit of time working on it. But my hope, and this is, I think, the hope of every artist that puts a work out into the world, is that, my fascinations, my interests, my concerns, my worries, my fears, my dreams will sort of meet the person, meet the audience, meet the reader, meet the person viewing the painting, and that the tuning fork in their soul will be sort of rung, and that they will see themselves twinned in those fascinations, in those fears, in those hopes, in those dreams.
This book crosses genres with a bit of magic in that some people float. What is floating, and what is its meaning and significance in your book?
It's so funny. Floating is a thing that happens periodically in the book, where characters will levitate, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes involuntarily. And part of my process in sort of conceptualizing a book is thinking of all the sort of cool things. that I want to see, whether it's cool images or what have you. And this idea of somebody floating, particularly in a public area that's impossible to avoid in a city, was very captivating to me. And so I started with the image, and then from there had to figure out what it represented thematically, metaphorically, what have you. And I don't want to go too into detail because I do want this to be a thing that the reader, sort of discovers for themselves. But it's not simply a plot device, is where I will leave that.
From our last interview, we discussed religion in your background. I recall Tochi means praise God, and Onyebuchi means one who can discern the will of God. So after reading Harmattan season, I have to ask you, what do you believe happens to us when we die?
Oh my goodness, what a question. Um, Here's the thing. I don't know, but I take comfort in the not knowing. And I think that's something that my faith has given me. And that I think is one of the biggest blessings that I think faith can give to a person in general is there is so much that is unknown and unknowable in our universe, in our lives, and what have you. And that unknowability can be a source of intense anxiety, particularly with something like death, right? Um, but at the same time, this idea that there is some sort of author to the universe, there is some sort of governing thing. I don't even know if you can call it an entity, that there is something that puts stuff here or there. No matter how ludicrous it may sound to believe that, I think that idea can tell a person, oh, there are things that even though they are unknowable to you are knowable to something. They are in the hands of a minister actually at my church a long time ago when I was much younger. He was a guest preacher. He came through, it was a congregationalist church, and he said this thing that has stuck with me ever since. He said, we may not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And that right there, I think, encapsulates exactly why I feel comfortable not knowing what happens to us after we die.
That's a fascinating perspective because, as you noted, I think that unknowability can create anxiety for many people, and that you kind of flip that on its head in interpreting instead that that is a source of comfort. And I think that's also interesting because I think some other people of faith think that faith gives them a feeling of knowing that what they believe is true and will happen, and so they're not worried about it. And so reconciling knowing and faith and belief and facts, how do you reconcile that all?
Oh my goodness. I mean, the answer, I mean, that question could be its own conversation. Um, Faith doesn't necessarily mean, living in ignorance. This isn't to say that like science is heretical or anything like that. I think one of the, one thing that's always been interesting to me is following or interacting with people of science who also have a strong faith or a strong religious background. Because a lot of times for them, discoveries in science really sort of highlight the wonder and beauty and specific magnificence of the worlds that we live in. They'll discover something, and the reaction to them isn't necessarily that a mystery has been solved and that the magic has been taken out of the thing so much as it is, this thing is so beautiful. I am so happy it exists. Whether it's the stars, whether it's, you know, undersea plant life. And so it's like every sort of discovery of new facts, not only points to further mysteries, but also can highlight how incredible the miracle of all of this is.
In previewing your upcoming book with its October publication, Racebook, A Personal History of the Internet, I couldn't help but to think Racebook is a clever play on the name Facebook. But what is Racebook about?
So Racebook is a personal history of the internet, but it's really a memoir along two tracks. It's sort of the recounting through essays of my own personal growth and transformation from, my early days on the internet with a 56K modem, firmly in the web 1.0 era where we would get the American Online discs and everything, to who I've become in this era of web 3.0 where there's all this cryptocurrency and AI, and in many ways the internet has turned us into commodified data points so that some company somewhere can more easily sell us a sweater. What is the course that one's identity takes, throughout all of that, and what has been the influence of the internet on that? And as that's happening, I'm also sort of telling the story of the internet from this place of incredible promise, this place that seems so open and so full of potential for wondrous things, to the sort of kind of sort of hellscape that that we're in now. What happened? Why did it happen? And so that is essentially the backbone of the collection. There are also digressions into androids. I talk about video games, particularly video games like Elden Ring and Sekiro and Dark Souls. There are essays about Call of Duty. Really, one of the points of the collection is to emphasize the fact that the internet is so much bigger than its most visible aspects. Oftentimes, when we talk about the internet, or when the internet has been talked of in recent years, people tend to think, or people tend not to think beyond social media, as though the entirety of the internet could be captured on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, when really the internet is so much bigger than that. The internet is WhatsApp, which lets me communicate with family back in Nigeria instantaneously. The internet is a Call of Duty lobby. The internet can be all these different places. It's a Twitch stream where, people can develop these incredible relationships with people that they will never meet in real life, but who could, in some instances, potentially save their lives. Like, there's so much more to the internet than the stuff that gives us brain rot. And so I'm hoping that this book is also somewhat optimistic about the way things can go, in part because, you know, it has been so beautiful in the past.
Now, you have work experience with a tech company, I understand. So, can you describe that and how it informed and affected this upcoming book?
Certainly, I there's actually a specific essay in the collection about my time at that job. The title of the essay is "I Have a Rendezvous with Death," which is probably indicative of what that job was like. But essentially, my work at the company was in event detection, so trying to figure out what was happening in the world before most other people knew. And this could be everything from areas hit by natural disasters to a Travis Scott album release to a terrorist attack in Barcelona. And so this job required all of us to have our eyeballs pressed up against the internet, oftentimes the worst of the internet, for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And so the essay is about what that does to a person, what being that online and witnessing that entire gamut of human experience can do to a person. And spoiler alert, it's not always good. But yeah, so I do write about that experience in the collection.
Well, nonetheless, overall, it seems you're very optimistic about technology, the internet, and where things are going. And I was a little surprised to hear that answer because from Goliath, you didn't seem that optimistic about climate change and the direction of where things are going in that way. Considering a lot of what's going on with the internet and AI and election interference and a lot of the disinformation out there that frankly is making a participatory democracy a bit harder. Where is your optimism coming from in terms of responses to some of those drawbacks that seem a little inevitable?
No, you're absolutely right to point to, so many of the different ways in which, it seems like the world that we've known is collapsing, whether it's, participatory democracy in US, whether it's what's happening in Sudan and Gaza, like so many, it's almost like the entire post World War II world order is collapsing, right? I think the issue is where I've chosen to locate my optimism. So, going into the issue of AI, right? We've already seen the deleterious effects that, you know, chat bots and what have you can have on people, right? Whether it's, affecting learning outcomes in college because now you can have a paper written for you, whether it's people being nudged into psychosis or psychotic episodes due to these relationships that they develop with these, machine learning apps, right? There are so many different ways in which this stuff, being as unregulated as it is harming us. At the same time, one of the interesting things that's grown a little bit louder in recent months, I'd say maybe even, this past year, is a lot of the growing backlash to something like AI. For so long, we've been told that the AI revolution is inevitable, that, you got to get on the train or it's going to leave you behind. AI may not take your job, but somebody who knows how to use AI will. And increasingly, we're seeing the backlash that customers, consumers don't want this. I think there are a number of, businesses even that have chosen not to integrate this technology or whose employees have been reluctant to or absolutely refuse to integrate this technology. There aren't enough people who want to buy these products to make them sustainable, or to make these business models and these businesses sustainable. So I think that's a place for optimism too. You look, for instance, at, the movie going experience in the movie industry, right? Like, particularly in the wake of the writer's strike and, the infusion of tech into the legacy media experience, and with the profusion of franchise movies and sequels and everything's a remake or what have you, or a sequel. A movie like Sinners pops up and you're like, where did that come from? And that also feels indicative of the fact that there are these seeds that have been planted that could grow into these massive, robust oak trees, providing shelter to some of us. And so there are these things that are happening. You look also too with regards to geopolitical events. So much of the ground level resistance to the horrors that are happening in Gaza, for instance, like that may not necessarily manifest in, you know, uh, governments reevaluating their trade agreements with other governments, but it does signal that there is an affinity with Palestinians, with what, the horrors that Palestinians are suffering and whatnot. And you can argue what that counts for or how much that matters, but I do think ultimately in the end that that does matter. So there are places in which one can locate their optimism, even though the big picture that we're seeing, or at least that we're being presented with, is one of absolute calamity.
Now, putting on your legal hat, what regulations do you think would be helpful or even necessary to put some of this genie back into the bottle, or can we not? Pandora's out of the box and down the street.
Oh no, it's not. It's definitely not too late. I mean, I think some of the thinking behind, particularly the chat bots and the art bots and, companies like Midjourney and Sora and whatnot, was the idea that if they just ingested enough data, whether it's books, whether it's movies, what have you, if they just did it fast enough, it's almost like if you're playing football and you're on offense and you run a play, you get a first down, but your left guard committed the most egregious holding penalty in the history of the game, except the ref didn't catch it. So what do? If you're the quarterback, you move up to the new line of scrimmage and you run the next play before anybody can, and I think that was the thinking with a lot of these tech companies that if we just commit the penalties fast enough and move to the next line of scrimmage, nobody can do anything about it. But like that's not necessarily the case here. There can be, and there are court actions that are adjudicating the issue of copyright infringement, of intellectual property. And depending on the results, a lot of these companies that have done these things could go away. They could lose their funding. And so that sort of gets rid of that, to put it very, very crudely. But also it allows for there to be guardrails put into this sort of thing for courts to issue, precedent in cases like this and whatnot. The whole idea of move fast and break things, I think, assumes that there's going to be nobody who holds the breaker of things to account. They're going to get too big to fail or the damage will have already been done. There's always, always, always an opportunity for reparations.
So, Racebook is a memoir. How did the experience of writing this differ from or perhaps resembled the autobiographical elements referenced by Salman Rushdie's quote about characters in fiction?
This race book was so much fun to write, and I think partly because even though I dabbled in nonfiction before, I'd never done so to this extent. And so I was able to not just have opinions, but put them out there in undisguised fashion. So I could literally, quite literally, say what I thought about a thing. Um, and I could do so in a way that I didn't necessarily feel able to in my novels, where there are particular prose choices that I've made, particular stylistic choices that I've made. I realized that when writing these essays, I could be a little impish, I could be a little punchy. And this was a wonderful thing for me to discover about myself as a writer and as an opinion haver.
Well, Salman Rushdie's quote stuck with me because a little confession when I've tried to write fiction, sometimes I just found it did gravitate too autobiographical and did become just too painful to write. So, for you, what is more painful, writing a memoir or writing fiction?
Oh my goodness. I mean, they're both very fun, but also too, I think I have a different relationship to the pain of excavating one's personal history and integrating that into fiction. I tend to run towards the hard thing as opposed to away from it. So if I have like a grave fear or something like that, something I'm absolutely terrified of, I'll see that and be like, oh, that seems interesting. That seems compelling. Let me figure out why I feel that way. And oftentimes, the way for me to figure that out is to write a story about it.
I think I also read Francine Prose's book about writing, where she noted it's not for the faint of heart because also there are people around you. You can't care what they say, or even in a way, who you step on to get this out, whether it's in fiction or nonfiction. Is that ever an issue with you, and how do you grapple with or handle that?
I mean, for me, the fundamental question at the end of the day is it good? And is it good to me? Like by my standards? Is this sentence that I wrote, is this paragraph, is this essay, is this chapter, is this book good? And if the answer to that is no, then all the other questions are already irrelevant. I can't stand by the thing, I can't put it out. If the answer is yes, then that's really all that matters to me in the end. Like starred reviews are wonderful, are absolutely wonderful. Seeing my name and the title of my book in publications, absolutely, like I love it. I don't take it for granted. Blurbs, I am so 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 grateful. But at the end of the day, it has to be a work of fiction or nonfiction that I feel proud to have my name on. And that I know I will continue to feel proud having my name on for the rest of my natural life because my name is going to be there forever. Like that's my name on the spine. I will be associated with that thing. do I feel comfortable or will I feel comfortable with my name on that thing? And I try to make sure that the answer is always yes.
Is there ever an issue, for example, a Musa in your background from your days at Yale or another time in your life who recognizes himself in a book and becomes a little upset with you? Has that ever happened? And how have you dealt with that?
It's so funny. The quite the opposite has happened actually. In my debut novel, Beast Made of Night, there's a character named Mario. She's a math genius and a very pivotal character in the story. She is named after one of my dearest friends, and she
So
knows that.
well, that's a very flattering account as a math genius. But have any of the more negative characters in your books ever seen themselves and did that worry you or were you ever confronted?
I mean, I think part of it is that my characters are, sort of amalgams of whether they're people I know or characters that I've encountered elsewhere, whether in books or movies or what have you. So there aren't ever really, at least that I can think of now, any one-to-one analogs. Um, and also too, because like that's not terribly interesting to me. I don't know how I would do, for instance, like taking somebody that I know from high school and then putting them in a space colony. Like I'm sure they're an interesting person and like all of that jazz, but I personally am not that interested in their life or their interiority. I would much rather, craft a person or a character whose interiority I would be interested in following.
But incidentally, I think Taylor Swift has had some incidents with
Yeah.
people who weren't too happy with some of her songs, but fortunately that
Yeah.
has not happened to you.
I try not to implicate um ex-partners in my fictions. This I feel like that's just standard business practice.
And you did address this earlier in our conversation, but going back, can you distill more exactly why did you write Racebook? Because I saw Goliath as a sounding alarm.
Mhm.
And what is it that you're hoping people walk away with Racebook? Because it also sounded quite optimistic. So is there a focal point, though, a main point or a couple of points that you want people to get from Racebook?
Yeah, I mean, I want them to come away from Racebook looking around at the current state of the internet and understanding that it's not always going to be this way. I think Racebook came about in some ways as a response to a lot of the prevalent discourse about the internet. And all these pieces, these books, these novels, these memoirs and whatnot, they all seem to be sermons about brain rot and how the internet was making us worse people, more alienated, all of that. And that just wasn't my experience of the internet, or at least not the totality of my experience on the internet, even today. And so I wanted to write something that felt a little truer to me and hopefully feels truer to a lot more people who feel like, the pessimism that flavors so much internet discourse is not necessarily in tune with the totality of their reality.
So, both with Harmattan season and with Racebook, do you not necessarily see them as calls to action, or do you feel even reading, thinking, understanding something, thinking is the very first step in a call to action?
Yeah, I mean, so part of it is as I've grown older, I've grown a lot more reticent about telling people what to do or telling people how to act or, jumping online and being, call your senator or like, you need to do this or like, this is how to protest properly or all that's like, I just, I've found the wisdom in not doing that. And so hopefully, I can just get people to think about certain issues or to think about just like people in certain situations or maybe even think about their own situation, not necessarily telling them how to how to be. I don't think fiction in particular should be looked at as moral instruction. I personally don't read novels to figure out how to be a better person, because the author is human just like me and figuring things out just like me. And maybe they might have a little bit more wisdom, but I don't know that, like, as much as I absolutely love the novels of Marilyn Robinson, I think Gilead is just a masterpiece. I don't know that I go to her, or at least her characters, for advice on how to be a better person. My hope, though, is that similar to Gilead's effect on me, a book can get me to think a little bit differently or even a little bit more about a particular subject, about a particular situation, maybe help me reframe things. And my hope is that, particularly with Racebook, I can put a little bit more of an optimistic cast on how we look at the world around us.
We talked a little bit before our conversation, so I'm going to, though, turn this around a little bit with a question that we touched on a little. And instead of asking, or you can also answer about special insights from your books, I want to ask you personally, what special insights about Tochi would you be willing to share as the author of these books and a window that these books provide into you?
So, I mean, this isn't necessarily at all evident in Harmattan season, and this is only briefly alluded to in Race Book, but it is something that I intend on delving into in much greater detail in later works. I'm a bit of a metalhead. My favorite genre of music is, in fact, heavy metal. Um, I have loved it since middle school, and I was in the thick of that new metal wave, like that. Like, and it's funny too. So a very interesting thing. Speaking of optimism and seeds being planted and all that stuff, right? Back in the early 2000s, so like I would say after that initial like 1999 explosion, right, with Korn and everything, new metal sort of came about, blew up, became super popular. We were hearing Linkin Park all over the radio. People were playing break stuff at parties, all this Limp Bizkit, and it became one of the most hated music genres of all time. One of the most denigrated. It was, people would be ashamed to have ever, engaged with the genre. Fast forward to like 2022, 2025, and whatnot, there are so many new metal bands now, like, and new metal bands with actual musicality and everything, drawing directly from, musical innovations that Limp Bizkit did, that Linkin Park did, that Korn did in particular, and being like, hey, this is actually one of, like, there were so many innovations in metal that happened during this time. Um, and so that, I think, is something that's been very illustrative to me of the way in which things can change and in ways that nobody could have ever predicted.
I just have to ask, how has new metal changed from old heavy metal? I was thinking I didn't imagine Tochi as a big AC/DC fan, but maybe you're not. So how has the evolution happened, do you think, in metal to your liking?
I mean, I think one of the things with new metal was there was a lot more syncopation. I mean, it came about during a time when there was also a big penetration of rap and hip hop in the mainstream. So, like, that was a total new thing. There are generally no guitar solos in new metal, which is a huge change. And so, like, there are things in which new metal kind of changed it made a lot of purists angry for, a lot of, somewhat justifiable reasons. But it was something that very much got people thinking about metal, got people thinking about distortion, all these things in a totally new light.
Well, sadly, we're out of time. Hour flew by. So thank you very much, Tochi Onyebuchi, for joining us on WNHH 103.5 FM, Law, Life, and Culture. I'm Betsy Kim.